Originally, BEE or Black Economic Empowerment was designed to help black business people or those wanting to enter into business to become part of the mainstream economy. Now, the first big effort was the Viva project, which set aside 5 billion rands to help black people buy shares in major companies and learn how to manage them. The goal was to give people the skills to run these companies. However, the project didn't succeed because big businesses realized that having their own black shareholders could give them a competitive edge, almost like having an inside person. They saw more benefit in handling these deals on their own rather than joining a national upliftment project like Viva. They knew that opportunities such as new mining rights and casino licenses could be easily secured with someone on the inside to influence the laws and regulations in their favor. Today, BEE has become an integral part of big business strategy. Now, in this episode, we'll explore the ANC's journey from a party rooted in the Freedom Charter with socialist leanings to becoming a neoliberal party with capitalist comrades. We'll also examine the rise of black millionaires and billionaires linked to the ANC, highlighting how big capital has worked to protect its interest while adapting to the new regime. In the mid-1980s, South African big business began to doubt the National Party's government's ability to stop the growing revolution and started seeking a partnership with the ANC. You see, the ANC, realizing a revolutionary takeover was unrealistic, they also sought to work with large businesses. Behind the scenes, corporate leaders formed relationships with ANC leaders, especially Nelson Mandela, who connected with wealthy businessmen like Harry Oppenheimer and Clive Manel, amongst a few. The ANC couldn't change the political or economic systems. You see, the collapse of the Soviet Union, a major supporter of the ANC, shifted the global landscape, and this change favored some ANC leaders who were less interested in state socialism, pushing the ANC away from the leftist policies due to the pressures from the organizations like the International Monetary Fund. The ANC transformed the Apartheid-era inequality into a different kind. They implemented policies that increased inequality over time. And South Africa is now one of the most unequal societies in the world, leading to a high level of unemployment and a high crime rate. In 1994, several wealthy individuals connected to the ANC emerged, showcasing how some people exploited new economic opportunities and political connections for personal gain. Now, big businesses sought to protect their interest while aligning with the new political regime. Now, Spicer, an executive at Anglo America, was one of the people who played a key role in the alignment effort. In the late 80s, the feasibility of apartheid was diminishing amid global change and domestic unrests. Townships were burning and the youth resisted fiercely. Tambo called for making the country ungovernable, and the instability and international sanctions significantly affected big businesses in South Africa. In September of 1985, Anglo's executives and business leaders met with exiled ANC leadership in Lusaka, Zambia, under the auspices of President Kenneth Kaunda. Now, this first formal meeting between big business and the ANC aimed to discuss global changes and the ANC's need to modernize their thinking. Now, the ANC is still banned and viewed as a terrorist organization by many, surprised business leaders with their diplomatic approach. However, the ANC's economic plans were found to be outdated, relying on the 1950s Freedom Charter, which did not address the contemporary global context of collapsing communism, evolving financial systems, and Western dominance. The ANC, having been in hiding and exile for so long, had become more focused on survival and lost touch with the changing world. They were aligned with communist regimes around the world like Cuba and the Soviet Union, which influenced their policies in the Freedom Charter, particularly emphasis on nationalization. Now, in contrast, big business wanted ANC to abandon their socialist and communist ideologies in favor of capitalism and globalization. Within the ANC, Thabo Mbeki was the only member with a solid understanding of the economy, thanks to his studies at Sussex University, while the rest lacked knowledge of large-scale economies. You see, the apartheid government had poorly managed the economy and state-run industries. Now, business leaders wanted the government to reduce its involvement in business and adopt a free market private enterprise system. Although the meeting between business leaders and ANC did not yield significant results, it marked the beginning of communication and highlighted the ANC's deficiencies. Now, big business recognized the need to help the ANC prepare for future governance, and also understanding that they would need the ANC on their side once they are in power. Now, Anglo-American would play a crucial role in shaping South Africa's political future. However, P.W. Botha was displeased with the meeting as it undermined his authority.
South African business leaders flew to the neighboring country of Zambia today for unprecedented talks on the future of their country with black guerrilla leaders outlawed by the South African government. The businessmen who control much of South Africa's vast wealth were acting independently of their government.
I had the conventional view of the ANC as the devil incarnate. White-hating, murderous, terrorist, communists, Moscow-dominated puppets. I mean, this was the common perception of them.
The meeting was held behind the closed gates of a game reserve in the dry bush of eastern Zambia. The white businessmen represented the highest levels of South Africa's non-government power structure. A year ago, it would have been unthinkable and indicates business's deep concern that the end is coming.
Naturally, the South African businessmen gravitated towards one side of the circle and the ANC on the other side of the circle. And the ice was broken when Oliver Tambo made some quip about the division, the apartheid of the seating arrangements, if you liked, at which stage everybody burst out laughing and we mixed in. The ANC executive, at least a half of them, were members of the South African Communist Party. We were concerned about this. You know, we're businessmen, we're capitalists. But they said that the communists on the ANC executive were ANC members first and Communist Party members second, and that the ANC was not a communist organization. They used Sweden as an example of a model democracy. I was surprised at that. It was obvious to me that the ANC had an overwhelming nostalgia to return to South Africa, which they were then unable to do, and I found it very easy to like them on a personal level.
We admired the fact that this group of business leaders decided to come to Lusaka, notwithstanding expressions of disapproval by P.W. Botha. We thought it was a recognition on their part that it's not really going to be possible to resolve the problems of South Africa without involving them.
On their return to South Africa with the private jet, business leaders criticized the ANC for their outdated economic thinking, saying they were stuck in Marxist and Leninist ideologies after 30 years of being underground, while globalization and technology were rapidly advancing. Ernest Oppenheimer modernized South Africa's gold and diamond mining industry in 1917 and helped establish migrant labor system that caused social strife under apartheid. Now, mining companies, including Anglo, perfected deep drilling techniques now used globally, but these companies collaborated with the apartheid government to ensure a steady supply of cheap labor, with Anglo being a major player in the scheme. Before the National Party came into power, Anglo expanded significantly, acquiring a lot of business. Some of them includes Union Steel, Highveld Steel, Score Metal, Mondi Paper, vehicle retail and production. This includes Ford SA, and I think they owned Toyota as well. They also had shares at Barclays Bank, parts of Barlow World as well, and SAB, South African Breweries and Sugar Company Hewlett. They also owned a part of Premier Milling and also Liberty. You see, Anglo controlled 34% of the JSE market capitalization, followed by Sanlam with 16%, Rembrandt with 15%, and Old Mutual with 14%, and the rest was just these other smaller players. South Africa was in turmoil in the 1980s. The youth of 1976 were rebellious, causing chaos with uprisings and social unrests. Townships were burning and local councillors collecting rent for government were met with hostility. When Botha's administration raised township rents in 1984, unrest spread from Sharpeville to other areas like Everton, Sebokeng, Tembisa, amongst others. Now, security forces took out around 26 people, leading to widespread boycotts and stayaways in places like Soweto and other areas around South Africa. At the time, both the security forces intensified and cracked down on activists. You see, one thing to take note of is that true power laid with the State Security Council, and it was dominated by Botha and the military-industrial complex, not the cabinet. On the 15th of August 1985, Botha delivered the Rubicon speech in Durban, refusing to end apartheid or give in to liberal and township pressures. Now, this stance led to economic fallout, with international investors withdrawing, creditors demanding payments, and increased sanctions isolating South Africa financially.
The nationalists' ghastly failure to manage the economy will cost them much support at this election. We shall not come right without adequate political and constitutional reform. If we do not improve our political position in the world, money, he says, will continue to flow out of our country.
Big business in South Africa faced a dilemma, as they couldn't easily move money or invest it abroad. They needed market-oriented politics to stay viable. After the meeting in Lusaka, the Consultative Business Movement, the CBM, was formed to facilitate a dialogue between white and black leaders, now leading to engagements with Mandela by 1986 in preparation for his release later on. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was facing economic problems and major food shortages. Now, the Cold War had become enormously expensive, and the cost of maintaining the USSR's involvement in various proxy battles around the world, including in Angola, became unsustainable. For instance, the ANC's annual budget was estimated to be $100 million. Now, Moscow started losing interest in the ANC's Africa struggle, forcing the organization to look for alternative ways to resolve the conflict. Now, additionally, in Jan of 1989, Botha suffered his second stroke and relinquished his position of power in September 1989, now paving the way for de Klerk to become the next president. For the returning comrades who had been exiled for years or even decades, Johannesburg was a shock. They were unfamiliar with the complexities of modern South African apartheid society, having had no exposure to business, capital markets, pension funds, medical schemes, or workings of a free market economy. They were also concerned about their safety, with fears that they could be targeted. Many preferred to live in high-rise buildings rather than houses for security reasons. Apart from leaders like Mandela, Mbeki, and Tambo, most ANC comrades, ordinary fighters and activists, were left to fend for themselves. They had little money and were deeply concerned about their security and lacked a strong network and leadership. Mandela, having just been released from prison, had limited capacity to address their needs, as there were no resources for him to travel across the country to meet them. With limited funds available, the ANC could only afford to pay each member from exile 2,000 rands, which was insufficient to sustain them. Now, Anglo-America was the first to step in, providing accommodation and financial support to some leaders. Now, this marked the prelude to the BEE era. In Jan of 1992, Mandela's visit to the World Economic Forum in Davos marked a shift in the ANC's economic policy. he learned that nationalization was no longer a central focus of modern socialism and began to reconsider his stance. Subsequently, Mandela requested a group of MDN representatives, including Tito Mboweni and Jane Naidoo, to attend a World Bank session in Washington, D.C. Mandela was eager to train his people in financial skills and used his influence to give his officials exposure to global finance. He arranged training with top official firms in New York and met regularly with key figures like Oppenheimer to exchange ideas. Now the ANC was fully adopting capitalism, moving away from its socialist ideologies of the Freedom Charter. Now to address concerns from its socialist factions, the ANC introduced the RDP, aimed at improving economic conditions and redistributing the wealth. However, big capitalists viewed the RDP program as too socialist of an idea. Now the government faced severe financial constraints. They also inherited a bankrupt state at the time. Consequently, the RDP was reduced to just a subpar housing project that we all know now. For the democratic transition to succeed, South Africa's economy needed to stay strong, and it was crucial for black people to have a real stake in it. Simply offering high-paying jobs wasn't enough. A strategic approach to economic empowerment was needed. The first major BEE initiative was the Viva project, which aimed to create a central fund to support BEE deals. Now this involved breaking down large companies like Anglo, selling off their non-core assets such as the SAB, hotels and newspapers, using the Viva fund to help black investors to acquire these businesses. Now the goal was to give black people ownership and management opportunities with skills transfer to enable them to run these businesses effectively as time went on. Basically, most of the money was going to be thrown into a pot, and then more people could apply if they wanted maybe to buy a stake in a certain business that they had maybe skills in, using that same fund to fund the transaction, and then over time they can repay the fund and everybody can do the same, so that black people eventually they could be uplifted instead of just giving money to one entrepreneur. In the first year of democracy, there were 20 empowerment transactions of these BEE deals, which increased to 20 per month by 1998. Now by September 1995, 11 JSE listed companies were black controlled with a market value of 46 billion rands. Now by 1998, this number rose to 26 companies with a market value of 52 billion rands. Now these deals often involved lending capital to empowerment partners to acquire assets which they would repay later. Now notable deals included Anglo with the JCI and Jonic, and also Sanlam with their spin-off Metropolitan. NAIL was led by Jonty Sandler, Dikgang Moseneke and Cyril Ramaphosa. Now Ramaphosa left politics on the 14th of April in 1996 when he was Secretary General of the ANC. Now Mandela announced this in a media conference in Cape Town. You see, Ramaphosa was moving to a senior position at NAIL. Some believed he was pushed out by people like Thabo Mbeki because he wanted to be Mandela's deputy and eventually the next president. And most business leaders, they actually liked Ramaphosa because he was very friendly and very cozy with them. One of the things is that Ramaphosa's stance when it comes to economic policies, he was leaning more towards globalization and capitalism. So he was a preferred candidate for business to work with. Ramaphosa joined NAIL while it was acquiring Anglo's share in Jonic. Now Jonic is an industrial group with interest in mining and media. He was appointed deputy chairman of NAIL. By November of 1996, Ramaphosa and his crew at Nail had completed the deal, buying a 35% stake in Jonik for 2.6 billion rands. Now at the time, Jonik had a market capitalization of 8.5 billion rands and held significant stake in major companies like South African Breweries, Toyota, MTN, Sunday Times, Business Times, and Financial Mail, amongst a few. However, the key asset at Jonik was a mining company that was called JCI, which they lost to Mzi Khumalo, who later lost that same company to Brad Kerbel.
After thorough discussion between myself and other senior members of the ANC, it has been decided that Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa, Secretary General of the ANC, will be taking up a senior position in the private sector. Comrade Ramaphosa will resign his position as a member of parliament once the constitution writing process is completed. His position as member of the National Executive Committee and Secretary General of the ANC remains unchanged. On behalf of the entire National Executive Committee of the ANC, I wish to take this opportunity to commend my comrade and colleague, Cyril Ramaphosa, for the important contribution he has made in building our organization, the ANC, in the nation-building effort, and in the broader task of reconstruction and development. I am confident that all these strands will continue to draw from his immense leadership qualities.
Well, as the President has said, my position in the National Executive Committee and as Secretary General remains unchanged. No doubt these matters are going to be discussed further, and we will have to work out exactly what type of involvement I continue to have in the organization itself as an official of the organization, and also what role and time I also give in the private sector.
In 1999, Ramaphosa fell out with Nail's executive director, Johnny Sandler. Now in 2001, he started his own company, Millennium Consolidated Investments, MCI, to manage his own personal investments. Now he took his entire support staff from Nail to his new venture. Within a year, he became a BEE partner with Alexander Forbes, securing a 30% stake. He had strong investors behind him. Companies like Investec, Old Mutual, amongst a few, had invested in his company, so he was able to buy into the Alexander Forbes deal easy. Now later, the company was rebranded as Shanduka, which then bought stakes in Liberty, and they also bought McDonald's South Africa. Now they also acquired a 1.2% share of Standard Bank in a 5.5 billion rands deal. Now the Chinese Sovereign Fund also invested in Shanduka after they bought out Old Mutual and Investec's 25% stake in Shanduka, hoping that Ramaphosa would become the president in the future. And it did happen. Now Ramaphosa became a very wealthy figure in South Africa as big capital sought to divest their non-core assets to emerging black industrialists. His seniority and influence in the ANC made him a valuable asset on the boards of major companies. Now eventually, Shanduka was acquired by Phuthuma Ntleko's investment firm Pembani, and Ramaphosa earned around 2.5 billion rands for the deal. Then in 2015, he was the 42nd richest person in South Africa with a net worth of 6.8 billion rands. Patrice Motsepe was born in Soweto on the 28th of Jan 1962 to Augustine and Kay Motsepe. Now the family later moved to Ga-Rankuwa in Hammanskraal, where his father ran several businesses including a shop, some eateries and a beer hall. Now Patrice spent much of his childhood helping in these businesses. He attended a Catholic school and later studied at the University of Swaziland before earning a law degree with Wits University. Before 1994, a lot of black people didn't have any exposure to big business, the economy, or commerce as a whole. So the government took young black entrepreneurs and professionals to countries like the United States to expose them to black-owned businesses and how they were run. Patrice Motsepe was part of that group, and during that trip, he made a lot of connections from people here in South Africa and abroad. In 1998, Patrice joined the law firm Bowmans. He was then sent to Richmond in Virginia to work at another law firm called McGuire Woods, where he focused on mining law. Now, 2 years later, he came back home where he became a partner at Bowmans, specializing in mining law. Now, Motsepe then started his own company, Future Mining, where he offered different services like cleaning mine shafts. Basically, they were doing low-level jobs there. But this experience and his knowledge of the mining law gave him a better understanding of what makes a mine successful and what causes failure. In 1997, with gold prices falling and the rand stable, Bobby Godsell, the CEO of Anglo Gold, wanted to offload struggling mines but also aimed to empower black mining leaders. Now, Anglo Gold gave Motsepe's African Rainbow Minerals the mines with an agreement to pay back with future profits. Now, many business leaders, including Oppenheimer, were skeptical about Motsepe's chances of making this deal work. But those who were close to the situation say this was such an obvious deal, it was such a jackpot, that Motsepe would have been an embarrassment to black people if he didn't make this deal a success. Now, Patrice revamped the mines by relocating his offices to Orkney, increasing work hours and reducing the workforce by a third. His changes improved the mine's performance, allowed him to repay Anglo Gold and made his company profitable, earning 30 million rands in just 6 months. In 2002, Motsepe partnered with Harmony Gold to buy more underperforming Anglo mines in the Free State for 2.2 billion rands. Now, this deal proved successful, generating 400 million rands in the first quarter. Now, Motsepe was a winning horse, he was a money-making machine because everything he touched was turning into a profit. In the early 2000s, the South African government started implementing sectoral charters to enforce black participation in business, especially the finance sector where there wasn't a lot of black players. Now, this was led by a BEE commission under Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, these charters required businesses to meet minimum black ownership and participation. Now, in 2003, Patrice formed Ubuntu Botho Investments to bid as Sanlam's empowerment partner. Now, he invested 200 million of his own money and then he borrowed 1.1 billion rands from investors. Now, the deal was a success because Sanlam kept on improving, kept on performing better, and that allowed Patrice to repay his loan and become the first black billionaire in the country in 2008.